I can't have a boyfriend because I don't even talk to anyone and no one talks to me. For as long as I could remember, I had been an observer. The world around me felt like a distant reality, like I was watching a movie from the outside, never quite able to step into the frame. The people around me seemed so effortlessly connected, so fluid in their conversations, in their friendships. They laughed together, they supported each other, they went on spontaneous adventures, everything I dreamed of, but couldn't seem to reach. I spent my days at work, my head down, trying to blend in. My routine was predictable. I woke up early, put on my clothes, grabbed a coffee, and went to my desk. I would stare at my computer screen, fingers frozen on the keyboard, wondering if I had anything interesting to contribute. I didn't. I wasn't interesting, or at least, that's how it felt. In meetings, I sat quietly in the corner, a part of the background, listening to others speak and offer their thoughts, while I fidgeted in my seat, praying the conversation wouldn't turn to me. I had always been shy, but it wasn't just a shyness that could be shaken off with a little encouragement. It was something deeper, something more ingrained. I had never learned the social skills that seemed to come so easily to others. Growing up, I had always kept to myself, preferring books and solitude to playdates and social gatherings. The few friends I had were distant, more out of necessity than genuine connection. I never knew what to say, how to say it, or when to say it. It felt like there was a barrier around me, a wall that I couldn't see, but could feel whenever I tried to reach out. Even in the rare moments when someone did speak to me, the words never felt real, never felt like a bridge connecting us. I would stutter or freeze, the sentences in my head clashing against the quiet of my lips. The conversations would always end awkwardly, leaving me with a sense of relief and frustration. I would retreat into myself, replaying every word I said and wondering what I had done wrong. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk to people. It was that I couldn't. The words just never came out the way I intended, and the more I tried to speak, the more distant I felt from everyone around me. The hardest part was the loneliness, the isolation that came with being surrounded by people but never truly connecting with anyone. I saw others forming bonds, forming friendships, and I felt invisible. Social media posts, the photos of groups of friends on weekends, the selfies at concerts or dinners, it was a constant reminder of how I wasn't a part of any of it. I wanted so badly to be involved, to be seen, to be heard. But it always felt like no one noticed the silent girl sitting on the edge of the room. No one noticed the longing in my eyes, the desperate wish to be a part of something more than the quiet, solitary life I led. And then there was the pain of wanting something more. Wanting a boyfriend, a partner to share my life with, someone who could look at me and see more than just the quiet girl who never spoke up. I would watch couples walking hand in hand, laughing and joking, and feel a sharp pang of longing in my chest. They had found each other, found someone who loved them, who cared for them, who listened to them. I wanted that, I longed for it, but how could I ever find someone when I couldn't even talk to people? How could I form a connection when the words I needed to say were always trapped inside my head, unable to escape? I would imagine what it would be like holding hands, sharing stories, laughing over a cup of coffee. The little moments that seemed so simple to everyone else were the moments I dreamed of. But dreams were all they were. Reality was something different, something crueler. The truth was that I didn't know how to start, didn't know how to reach out. The idea of talking to someone, of letting them see the real me, terrified me. I wasn't sure what part of me I was afraid to show, whether it was the quiet, awkward version of myself that I had become or the person I longed to be, someone confident and vibrant, someone worthy of love. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my own fear had trapped me. I was the one who put up the walls. I was the one who stayed silent, who hid in the corners and avoided interactions. My lack of conversation wasn't just because no one spoke to me, it was because I had stopped speaking to others. I had built a fortress around myself, brick by brick, until I couldn't remember what it felt like to reach out, to open myself up to someone else. And in that silence, I had become invisible. I had convinced myself that no one would ever see me, that no one would ever want to get to know me. But even then, the desire for connection didn't go away. It only grew stronger. At night, when I lay in bed, the loneliness would settle over me like a heavy blanket. I would close my eyes and imagine what it would be like to be loved, to be desired. I imagined someone understanding my silence, someone patient enough to break through the barriers I had built. But even in these fantasies, I knew they were just that, fantasies. No one could reach me when I didn't even know how to reach myself. It wasn't just about wanting a boyfriend, it was about wanting to be seen. It was about wanting someone to look at me and say, "I see you. I see the person behind the silence. I see the beauty in your quietness, in the way you listen, in the way you care." But how could they see me when I couldn't even speak to them? The longer I lived this way, the harder it became to break free. The fear of rejection, of saying the wrong thing, of not being good enough, it all kept me trapped in my own solitude. I wanted to change. I wanted to take the first step, but I didn't know how. And so, I stayed in my own little world, hoping for a miracle that would pull me out, hoping for someone who would see through the silence and understand. But the longer I waited, the more distant the possibility seemed. As time passed, the thought of never having a boyfriend started to feel like a certainty. Maybe I wasn't meant for that kind of connection. Maybe I was destined to be alone, to live in the shadows of other people's lives, watching but never participating. And yet, in the deepest parts of my heart, I knew that wasn't true. I knew that somewhere out there, someone could love me, someone could see me for who I truly was. But for now, I could only wait for the courage to speak, to step out from the silence, and to let the world see me, even if it terrified me. The weight of this longing, this aching desire for connection, continued to grow each day. I often found myself sitting at my desk, looking at my phone, scrolling through social media, and seeing people share moments of their lives, moments that felt so far out of my reach. I envied the ease with which others formed relationships, their ability to make new friends, to smile and laugh and converse without a second thought. It was like they had something I didn't, something I couldn't quite understand or grasp. It was on days like these that I felt the sharpest pangs of isolation, the loneliness that seemed to seep into every part of my life. I would often ask myself why I couldn't be like everyone else. Why I couldn't just start a conversation with someone without overthinking every word, every gesture, every possible misstep. The anxiety, the fear of judgment, would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface, making it nearly impossible to just be myself. How could I possibly expect anyone to get to know me when I couldn't even let myself be known? I watched as people around me paired off, formed relationships, and built lives with someone they cared about. They were able to hold hands, exchange loving glances, laugh at inside jokes, and enjoy each other's company with ease. And while I was happy for them, a deep ache began to settle in my chest. The pain was subtle at first, something I could push to the back of my mind. But as time went on, it grew, until it felt like I was drowning in the reality that I was always on the outside looking in. I had tried to push myself out of my comfort zone. There had been moments when I tried to join a conversation at work, or tried to make small talk at a social gathering, but every time I did, the words felt too big, too awkward, like they didn't belong in my mouth. It was as if I was speaking a language I hadn't learned it properly, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the words to sound natural, to flow with the rhythm of normal conversation. And so, I would retreat. I would find myself back in the safety of my own mind, where the noise of the world couldn't reach me. But in those moments, there was a different kind of pain that would seep in. The kind of pain that came from the knowledge that I was the one standing in my own way. I wasn't just waiting for someone to come to me, I was refusing to take the steps that might lead to something more. The fear of rejection, the fear of failure, had become so ingrained in me that it had started to feel like a part of my identity. It was the armor I wore, the excuse I gave myself every time I didn't reach out, every time I let the opportunity slip away. The truth was, I had become comfortable in my own loneliness. It wasn't a comforting loneliness. But it was familiar. The idea of having someone in my life, of sharing those small, intimate moments with someone else, felt terrifying. The thought of being vulnerable, of opening myself up to the possibility of love and rejection, was overwhelming. I had convinced myself that I wasn't ready, that I wasn't enough, that I didn't deserve someone else's time or affection. But as the days dragged on, the ache for connection only deepened. It wasn't just about having someone to call my boyfriend or to be in a relationship with. It was about being seen, being understood, being known. I wanted to share my life with someone who could see the parts of me that no one else had noticed. I wanted to let someone in, let them see the person I had buried under layers of insecurity, fear, and self-doubt. I wanted someone to love me, not for what I pretended to be, but for who I truly was, the person I had yet to let the world see. I knew I had to change. I knew that if I wanted a connection, relationship, something meaningful, I couldn't keep hiding in the shadows of my own mind. I had to find the courage to speak, to put myself out there, even if it was messy and uncomfortable. But every time I thought about it, the fear would creep in. What if I said the wrong thing? What if they didn't like me? What if I made a fool of myself? The what-ifs seemed endless, and each one felt like another barrier I had to break through. Still, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I felt a glimmer of hope, a brief exchange with a coworker that felt a little less awkward than usual, a smile shared with a stranger in the grocery store, a moment when I caught myself thinking, maybe I'm not completely invisible. It wasn't much, but it was something. And maybe, just maybe, it was a sign that change was possible. I began to realize that it wasn't about waiting for someone else to take the first step, or hoping for someone to reach out to me. It was about learning to reach out myself, to break through the silence I had imposed on my life. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be failures, there would be moments of awkwardness, and there would be times when the fear felt overwhelming. But I couldn't let that stop me anymore. I couldn't let fear keep me trapped in this endless cycle of isolation. And so, step by step, I began to take small actions, striking up casual conversations with the people I saw regularly, joining group activities, forcing myself to step outside of my comfort zone, even if it felt uncomfortable. I started by making eye contact with people, offering a smile, saying hello instead of retreating into my shell. Little by little, I began to notice that the world wasn't as intimidating as I had once thought. People weren't as unapproachable as I had assumed. I started to see that the connections I longed for could be built, one conversation at a time, and the more I allowed myself to be vulnerable, the more I opened up, the more I allowed others to see me for who I truly was. It wasn't a quick transformation, and it wasn't without its setbacks. But each day, I could feel myself growing, stretching beyond the limitations I had placed on myself. And even though I still had moments of doubt, moments when the fear crept back in, I began to understand something important. Connection wasn't something that just happened. It was something you built, and maybe, just maybe, I was learning how to do that, one small step at a time. The process was slow, almost imperceptible at times, but there were moments of clarity that kept me going. Sometimes, after a brief conversation with a coworker or a stranger, I would feel a rush of accomplishment. It wasn't about whether the conversation was deep or meaningful. It was about the fact that I had done it. I had stepped out of my own shell, even if just for a moment, and shared a piece of myself with another person. But with each small victory came a wave of doubt. Was this real? Was I truly changing? There were days when it felt like I hadn't moved at all, when the silence and isolation seemed even heavier than before. I would wake up in the morning with the same feelings of dread, wondering if I was just pretending to move forward while actually staying stuck in my old habits. The negative thoughts still plagued me, whispering that I wasn't enough, that I was destined to be alone, that no one could truly love me for who I was. Those thoughts were hard to silence, and they often lingered in the back of my mind, casting shadows on any progress I had made. But in those quieter moments, I could see glimpses of the person I was becoming. I could feel the walls I had built around myself beginning to crack, just a little bit at a time. The more I reached out, even in small ways, the more I realized how much I had been holding back. It wasn't just about talking to people, it was about allowing myself to be seen. It was about not hiding behind the fear that had kept me isolated for so long. I had lived my life thinking that I needed to be perfect, that I had to present a flawless version of myself in order to be accepted, to be loved. But I began to realize that perfection wasn't the goal, connection was. And connections could only be made if I was willing to show up, flaws and all. One day, after a particularly hard week of feeling invisible and disconnected, I was walking home from work, lost in my own thoughts. I had become so used to the rhythm of walking alone, of being in my own world, that I almost didn't notice the person walking alongside me until they spoke. It wasn't anything profound, just a simple comment about the weather, but something in that moment made me stop. It wasn't the words themselves, but the fact that someone had chosen to speak to me. The simple act of sharing space with another person, of exchanging even the most mundane pleasantries, was something I hadn't allowed myself to experience in a long time. The brief interaction felt like a lifeline, a reminder that connection was possible, that I wasn't invisible. I felt my heart race, not from anxiety, but from something else, hope. Later that evening, I realized how much I had been waiting for someone else to make the first move, to reach out to me, to fill the silence. I had spent so much of my life waiting for things to change on their own that I had forgotten the power I had in creating those changes for myself. It wasn't about waiting for others to notice me, it was about finding the courage to notice others and take that first step. The moment wasn't life-changing in itself, but it was a turning point. A reminder that every small act of reaching out mattered. Every smile, every greeting, every attempt to connect, no matter how small, was part of the process. The following weeks were a mix of progress and setbacks. There were days when I felt energized, confident in the changes I was making, when it seemed like I was on the verge of truly breaking free from the isolation I had lived in for so long. And then, there were days when I doubted everything, when the silence seemed louder than ever, when I felt like I had taken 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. But each day I pushed myself a little further. I signed up for a weekend hiking group to meet new people, even though my stomach twisted with anxiety at the thought of being surrounded by strangers. I practiced starting small conversations with people at work, just a simple, "How was your weekend?" or "Have you seen the latest episode of that show?" Not every interaction went smoothly. Sometimes, I felt like I had said something awkward or misunderstood the tone of a conversation. But with each awkward moment came an opportunity to learn. And with every small interaction, I began to feel less like an outsider in my own life. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. I found myself sitting at a cafe, reading a book. When a couple sat down at the table next to mine, I noticed them almost immediately, their easy banter and laughter flowing naturally between them. For a moment, I felt a pang of envy. Why couldn't I be like that? But instead of retreating into my usual habit of watching from the sidelines, something shifted inside me. I decided to try something different. I put my book down, took a deep breath, and smiled at them. To my surprise, they smiled back. And before I knew it, I was chatting with them about the book I was reading, the best cafes in the neighborhood, and how I loved coming to this place to escape the hustle of daily life. It wasn't a long conversation, and it wasn't the start of a lifelong friendship, but it was something, a moment of connection. In that brief exchange, I realized something important. Connection wasn't as impossible as I had thought. It didn't require grand gestures or perfect conversations. It simply required me to be present, to take the chance, and to allow myself to be vulnerable. I couldn't control how others responded to me, but I could control my willingness to put myself out there, even if it was uncomfortable, even if it was messy. As the months passed, I continued to challenge myself. The fear of rejection, of awkwardness, didn't disappear overnight, but it slowly became more manageable. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect to be. But I was learning to be okay with the imperfections, with the moments of awkwardness, and to appreciate the small victories along the way. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe I would eventually meet someone special. Maybe I wouldn't, but one thing became clear to me. I wasn't going to let the fear of loneliness keep me from trying anymore. I wasn't going to sit on the sidelines of my own life, waiting for someone to notice me. I was going to start noticing others, and in doing so, I was starting to notice myself too. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a shift. It was subtle at first, like the slow turning of a tide, that you can't quite see, but you can feel beneath your feet. The world around me started to feel less intimidating, less like a distant spectator sport and more like something I could actively participate in. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was making small, intentional moves to engage, to connect, to put myself in spaces where relationships, friendships, even could blossom, regardless of whether they turned into something romantic or not. I found myself volunteering at local events, joining group activities that focused on shared interests like hiking, cooking, or writing. I knew I wasn't doing these things to simply fill the void of loneliness, but rather to give myself the chance to meet people in a more organic way. It wasn't always smooth sailing. I still struggled with the initial anxiety of group settings, the familiar discomfort of not knowing where to fit in, and wondering if anyone was actually interested in talking to me. But I pushed through. I gave myself permission to be awkward, to stumble, to make mistakes. I was learning that these moments didn't define me, they were just part of the process. One afternoon, I found myself at a local park, sitting on a bench after a long walk. The sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. There was something about the quiet calm of the evening that made me feel connected to the world in a way I hadn't felt before. I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by nature, the sound of birds chirping, the rustle of the trees, the distant hum of people talking and laughing in the park. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to fully appreciate the moment, feeling the weight of my own self-imposed isolation lifting just a little. As I sat there, lost in thought, a young woman with a golden retriever walked by. She smiled at me as her dog trotted past, wagging its tail, and for a moment, I caught her gaze. I was about to look away, but something inside me stopped me. I didn't look away this time. I held her gaze for a moment longer and offered a small smile in return. She didn't rush past. Instead, she slowed down and asked if I knew where the nearest coffee shop was. It was a simple question, one I'd answered many times before, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just about the coffee shop, it was about that tiny spark of connection that had ignited in that small moment. We spoke briefly about the park, the weather, the dog, and then she thanked me for the directions before walking away. Nothing extraordinary happened that day. But as she left, I felt something shift within me. That was the moment I realized how important the little things were, how small acts of connection could have a ripple effect that spread far beyond what I could see. That brief exchange had left me feeling lighter, like I had shared a piece of myself without even realizing it. From that point on, I started to take more notice of the world around me. I began to engage in the moments I had once dismissed as insignificant. I wasn't forcing anything. I wasn't trying to impress anyone or prove my worth. I was simply being present. I started talking to people in the elevator at work, asking coworkers how their day was, offering to help when I saw someone struggling with their groceries. Simple acts, but they were becoming part of a much larger shift within me. A shift away from the isolation I had built up for so many years. And yet, even as these small changes were happening, I still had those moments of deep self-doubt. I still questioned my worthiness of true connection, still wondered if I was simply setting myself up for more disappointment. I had spent so many years alone, building walls around myself to protect against the hurt that I couldn't seem to let go of. But those moments of connection, no matter how brief or fleeting, became the light that started to chip away at those walls. I realized that it wasn't about finding the one or expecting perfect relationships. It was about learning to be open, to experience the world without the weight of fear holding me back. Months passed, and my outlook on life shifted. I wasn't in a rush anymore. I stopped trying to force a relationship, stopped constantly searching for something to fill the void. Instead, I allowed myself to experience life as it came. I felt the rush of pride when I made a new friend. I felt the warmth of gratitude when I realized I had become someone others could depend on, even if only in small ways. And slowly, I started to notice the possibilities that were right in front of me. It was during this period of growth that I met someone who had been in my life for a while, but only recently did I start to notice. She was a familiar face in my social circle, someone I'd occasionally exchanged pleasantries with but never truly connected with. One evening, we both happened to attend the same event, and as we sat down next to each other, something clicked. It wasn't anything dramatic or earth-shattering. We simply began to talk not about anything in particular, just about life, about the people we knew, the things we liked. But for the first time, I didn't feel the usual barriers between us. I didn't overthink every word, every response. I didn't try to impress her or hide parts of myself. I just was. The conversation flowed easily, effortlessly even. We shared stories, laughed at silly things, and before I knew it, we had spent hours talking. There was no grand revelation or moment of clarity in that conversation, but when it was over, I realized something important. I had let my guard down, and she had too. For the first time, I felt seen and heard in a way that I hadn't felt before, not because she was the one who would save me from loneliness, but because I had allowed myself to connect in a real, genuine way. In the weeks that followed, we continued to talk more, spending time together in ways that felt natural. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I had grown, not just because of her presence in my life, but because of the journey I had taken to get to this point. I had spent so many years thinking that I wasn't enough, that I didn't deserve love or connection. But I had begun to see that the key to relationships wasn't about waiting for someone to come to me. It was about learning to open myself up, to be vulnerable, to take risks. Eventually, I found myself thinking that perhaps the biggest connection I had made wasn't with her but with myself. I had learned how to be present, how to step out of the shadows of my fears and embrace the world around me, imperfections and all. I had learned that true connection isn't just about finding someone else to love you, it's about loving yourself enough to open up to the possibility of something real, something meaningful. And for the first time in my life, I could see that there was more to my story than just loneliness. There was a future where I could find connection, not by waiting for it to happen, but by making the conscious decision to reach for it. One